So you were talking about the robustness of personnel, the organization as a whole. So how can data professionals ensure their organization is data resilient?
So, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I think your risk management professionals are going to love this answer because it starts there. The first thing is to begin with a data risk assessment, not a high level one, a comprehensive one. And we're not speaking about just looking at the IT, we're not speaking about just looking at the data quality, we're talking about looking at the capacity, looking at the capability, even on the people side. We're even evaluating the governance, gaps in governance, and in fact, typically, or not typically, often you find your audit findings are a great help to identifying areas where an organization is at risk. In one organization, for example, just by analyzing that data environment and actually performing the data risk assessment, and it wasn't even a really big organization, but when we started to analyze the ETL processes, ETL, extract, transfer, load, it's the movement of data in relational databases. There's a different paradigm for non-relational databases, ELTs, and many other different forms. But that movement of data, there were 15,000 ETLs taking place within just this part of the organization. And I asked the question, I said, what critical data elements are involved in these various ETLs so that I can track lineage and know which data is coming from where and how they're interacting and who's using the data out of these various ETLs. And they couldn't answer that question. First thing I did is went to the chief risk officer and I said, yep, and just raised the profile of the risk and said, do you know that as an organization, you cannot be sure that you're using data from your golden source, given that you cannot answer the simple question of which critical data elements are contained in which ETLs and how do these merge or produce the various regulatory or compliance or operational reports that the organization needs. So it's a thorough analysis right down to ETL level. Where are the risks in the organization? And the big thing then is when you start thinking about those controls, and again, for the risk professional, you'll really be smiling now, I hope, is those controls are in effect what your data resilience response is, oh gosh, 15,000 ETLs. What's my control? Okay, it's a challenging one because first of all, I'm going to need to unpack every single one of those 15,000 ETLs. I'm going to need to figure out what the data flows are. Fortunately, there was a data architect, so at least we could see the diversity of servers, 116 in this case, that all of these things were going to. But the process involved unpacking that entire flow to figure out what the risks were and what risk levels were involved. Was it CEO level risk? Was it executive level risk? Was it management? Was it supervisor? Was it frontline? And that is a really important first thing. And once you've got that sort of risk assessment done, then typically, again, hopefully you risk folks will be smiling, the whole risk assessment. So what is my inherent risk? So the whole probability times impact kind of context. And on the other hand, after controls, and that might not be an immediate response, the ETL one took months to sort out before we could say, well, there's still a residual risk of X, Y. But that residual risk score becomes a useful basis to start to think about how you prioritize that response. So, gosh, I've got to focus here because it's the highest risk impact. I've got to start here. But you may also find in some cases, wow, there's some really easy things we can do. Some of them not very high risk, some of them pretty high risk. You may want to prioritize those. So nuts and bolts of it, it all begins with the data risk assessment. What you will find is sometimes your enterprise risk office isn't always up to steam with even the whole concept of data risk and data resilience. And per your opening comment, Kevin, you were speaking about, yeah, in fact, the title of the article was Data Resilience and Data Risk. This is where it really starts, actually coming together. And just coming back to the topic, is sometimes you may need to educate or inform even your chief risk office of, gosh, guys, do you know you've got data risk? Here's an example. Here's the impact. Here's what the consequences of these things are. And in one client, for argument's sake, going up in the enterprise risk office for the first time after that, starting to include data risks in their enterprise risk register, which was a fabulous outcome. But that is the level at which this conversation really happens. It's not an operational conversation, it's a strategic conversation. And there's a question coming up a little bit downstream where I'll cover why it's strategic, but for sure, it begins with that risk assessment. If you don't know what that risk assessment is, how do you know which parts you're going to look at? For example, you may discover, oh, availability, dealt, there's no risk. Poof, beautiful. Then why, even look at that as a construct, and you might say, oh, my big concern is here on robustness. Okay, we've got some serious issues on robustness. What are those controls? Do I need to build capability? How am I going to govern that to ensure that the right kinds of things are happen? How do I escalate this through the organization to be sure that everyone in the organization is aware of the risk while we build those controls? But for sure, a big journey, a significant one, but probably the most important starting block.